By the way, shout out to everybody here on a Thursday before the last week of school. I know it's kind of a wild time of the year and exhausting for all of us. So, thanks for being here, and I hope it's helpful for staff. My name is Josh Featherston. I'm an ELD and film is lit teacher at Jefferson High School. And the grading practice that I focused on was increasing the weight of my summative assessments. Next slide. And so my question going into trying out this new approach was, how will my students respond if I increase the weight of assessments and in that process remove homework, classwork, and other practice activities from the grade? So all of the other assignments that they do to help them learn the content aren't going to count for points. The only thing that goes into the grade is the assessments. Next slide. So some of my anxieties about this, will my students be less motivated to do any of the non-assessment assignments? So if things like warm-ups, practice questions, homework don't count for their grade, then why would they do it? So that was one of the things I was worried about. Another thing is maybe they just won't think the policy is fair. Students are so used to getting points for everything that they do. So is there going to be some resistance? Are they going to complain because the film notes that I asked them to do aren't going to go into the grade book? And so these were some of the things that I was thinking about and kind of concerned about going into this. Next slide, please. So these are some of the assignments that students were asked to still do, even though they weren't going to be graded. So for my film class, every time we watch a film, students take notes. These could be questions, or they could be like a note taker where they're capturing different things as they watch. And that wasn't for points. Didn't go into a grade book at all. Reading questions for a novel. I have students read books, and there would be note makers that they would read that would help them understand what they were reading as they read it. Some of those were homework things, and so those also were not for points. Sometimes I have students read articles that would help them better understand the film or the book that we're studying, and that also would not be worth points. In my film is lit class, I've always had a notebook that students write in at the start of class every day. They do a warm-up journal entry to kind of get them into the, get them ready for class, but also to get them thinking about whatever topic that we're going to be doing. That would not be for points. Essay brainstormers, organizers, anything that's there just to help students prepare for their writing, again, not for points. And things like structured talk, collaboration, group work, not for points. So going into this, I was kind of concerned. I was like, all right, I'm going to still try to do all of these things that typically go into the grade book, but not actually put them in the grade book. And so if you could go to the next slide, please. After doing that, I asked my students if they thought that this was a fair policy. There's a ton of words on this slide, so I'll just summarize it. So basically, I was asking them, do they think that this policy is fair, where only the assessments count for the grade, all the other assignments don't count? And most of them did think it was fair. And I think part of that is because I had quite a few conversations with them about why I was making this shift. And they seem to understand that. And if we go to the next slide, there's a few comments from students that they gave. So one student said, I think this is a fair policy because when we're first doing the assignment, we're going to struggle because we're still learning. And when you learn something and you don't understand it, you have to practice. Another student said, sometimes it's common to have mistakes in practicing. So I like that mistakes don't count for my grade. Another student said, I think it's good because that way you're always learning. And another student said, I like this policy because it's less stressful when I'm learning. So there's a few themes there around students recognizing that some of these assignments that we're doing to prepare them for the assessments or that are just part of the learning process don't need to be for a grade. And their purpose is there just to help students understand the material, learn the material, et cetera. And some of them were starting to understand that. I especially appreciate the last comment about it being less stressful, right? If everything's for points, then there's always that pressure to do it perfectly every time. And real learning, especially if we're giving them really challenging, appropriate tasks, like they're going to make mistakes. It's just part of the process. So I really like that students, some of my students were starting to pick up on that. If you go to the next slide, that past one was for my ELD class for semester 1. This is for my Film is Lit class, which is basically like a 12th grade English class. And I asked them the same question in spring semester. And that top graphic is their response to, do you think that this is a fair policy? About 80% said yes. There were a few more maybes and a couple no's. And then below that, I added on an additional question asking them, do you think that the above policy is beneficial for student learning? And interestingly enough, there were more students that were unsure of this policy being beneficial for student learning. They seem to understand that it was fair, that, I'm really trying to assess what they know and make that part of their grade. But there were more students that were kind of like, I don't know if this is going to be better for student learning. So if you go to the next slide, there are some of their comments, some comments that might illuminate some of that. So one student said, I think it's fair because the notes and worksheets Mr. Featherston gave us were to help us prepare for assessments. So I think it's fair for the grades to be based on just assessments. Another student said, I think it's fair as it gives us a chance to focus more on bigger assessments rather than worrying about small point worksheets and all that stuff. Another student said the worksheets were helpful. I just think the issue with not grading them is that students might not complete them, but it will only affect themselves as it's only there to help us. So this was a concern that I had too. And I think students, especially seniors who have been in traditional classrooms for, for 11, 12 years and are used to everything counting for points, they were kind of thinking, like students are maybe used to being motivated by points or having teachers that motivate them by points. And so are they just not going to do it? Another student said, I think it helps with prioritizing and focusing on the bigger projects and work. And then this last student did not like the policy. They said, I don't like this policy because with the practice worksheets show that students are actually learning something, and some students are bad test takers. It would suck to be such a good student and end up with one bad test grade. That brings their entire overall grade down. And this was kind of a little bit surprising for me because I don't really necessarily give like high stake tests. A lot of my assessments were more essays, writing, projects, presentations. And so I think there's still that anxiety there though anyway for students around assessments in general. And so I totally understand that. And I think, I'm focusing kind of just on one of these practices today, but I think like trying other grading for equity practices, like allowing retakes could allow students to feel like some of the pressure is off and it's not just a one-shot thing. So I think some of these different practices can work together. If you go to the next slide, please. So these are kind of my takeaways. I basically, eliminated copying. Students didn't have a reason to copy anything because, these worksheets aren't worth points. There was less grade inflation for students who kind of know how to play the game of school. There are some students where they just like turn in everything, like even if they're just filling it out just to fill it out. And so there's definitely less grade inflation. I'd say in the beginning, grades were a lot lower, and it took students time to kind of take advantage of retakes or get accustomed to the system to adjust. But grades didn't all just go up based on this. But grades definitely were more accurate. And I think that's the most important thing with this practice for me is that grades are more accurate. They represent what the students know. And things like homework or things like practice assignments don't necessarily give me that sense of what they know. So we're really focusing on the assessments. The next thing is just I really had to justify the things that I was giving students to do that weren't part of the grade. So I found myself having conversations with them around like, why do we do a warm up at the start of class? Why do I have you talk with your partner before I have you write? Why do I have you take notes while you're watching a film, and justifying all those things, and having like a real clear reason that I can go to when asking students to do things that aren't for points. And then just a kind of a icing on the top, less clerical work for me. So I had more time for lesson planning, giving feedback, and not feeling overwhelmed by having to put every little assignment in the grade book. So this is one thing that I tried out. There are a few other things I tried out, and I don't feel like I figured it out, but I definitely noticed that I think this made me a better teacher, and I think also for my students, it shifted the emphasis to learning and away from points. So thanks for listening to my slides on that.
All right, thank you, Josh. Okay, we'll get an opportunity for question and answer at the end, but let's move to the next presenter. Marlene Gutierrez.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And like Josh, I really appreciate that you took time to be part of this session. So I'm Marlene Gutierrez from Terra Nova High School. And the focus of my research, well, the grading practice that I focused on this year is retakes and reperformances. Next slide, please. So I've been teaching for 38 years. And the last 22 years here in California. So you could just imagine how difficult it is for me to make this paradigm shift, because I'm so used. I mean, I'm almost in 2 or 3 years time, I'll be retiring. And so just to make this shift to retakes, for example, was really a struggle for me. But anyway, so I teach 2 periods of chemistry. I also have 2 AP environmental science classes and 1 class of AP chemistry. Next slide, please. Now, I focus on retakes because this is something that I've been doing for the past maybe 2 or 3 years before the pandemic. But I was doing it not from the lens of equitable grading practices. It was just really to avoid parents running after me at the end of the year and asking them why is because I could always say, well, I give retakes, they don't take advantage. It was an easy excuse for me to tell parents and even students, well, I'm not going to raise your grade or give you extra credit because you never took advantage of the retakes. But during the pandemic, it really made me rethink about my grading practices. And I came across an article on equitable grading practices. And then I came across a preview of the book by Joe. And so when the district offered this opportunity to participate in the PD, I volunteered readily, and I thought I want to do retakes. I'll really look at how I'm doing retakes, and since I've started it, and I just want to make sure that I'm doing it in such a way that it is creating a growth mindset in my classroom, and it's equitable for everyone. And so I focus on. Could we go back to the previous slide? I wanted to the previous slide, please, Karine. So I thought I would focus on 4 questions. If I give students an opportunity to learn from mistakes through retakes, will there be an increase in the number of students who are meeting expectations? And then the other question is, will they take advantage of this opportunity? And then if they do take advantage of this opportunity, how will they prepare for it? Because I don't want them to just show up and, I need to retake a quiz on blah, 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 and then they didn't even prepare for it. So what's the point of relearning from your mistakes if we did not have a chance to figure out what went wrong in the first quiz, for instance? And then what structures, since I'm looking at it from an equitable lens, I should have structures in place, because in the past, students who retake are those students who don't have to take the bus. In Terra Nova, you have to leave right away if you take the bus. Otherwise, you will not have a way home. So how will I meet the needs of those students who want to do the retakes if I don't put structures in place that are part of our regular school day? Next slide, please. So I started my retake. Even before the PD, I already told my students that I'm going to have retakes. And at the beginning, it's really just my AP students and those students in my regular chemistry classes who are your typical A students who are very grade conscious, who would take advantage of retakes because they don't want an 8 out of 10. They want a 10 out of 10. And so I had to start. Um, could you press the? So I had to start having conversations with students, particularly from my fifth period class. So period 5 is a regular chemistry class, but almost half of them have IEPs or 504s. And so I really started focusing on them. I would communicate to their case managers, and I would also email home that I would like you to come for a retake on this day, blah, 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 blah. And it was really good that we started our flex time this year because that gave me an opportunity that really kind of provided everyone a structure for retakes. So we have flex time twice a week. And so the first, so Tuesdays asking for help time, and then Thursdays for retakes. I did this because the first time I did retakes, Tuesday, Thursday, I got, it was just insane. I just couldn't, someone is asking for help about the lesson, but here's another one who wants a retake, and I have I have 3 preps, and so I just went crazy. So I had to organize my my flex time. Next slide, please. So all these observations are going to be percent, and so it might be confusing. So in a nutshell, my period 5 students, usually if I don't schedule them for flex time, they won't come to take a retake. No, so I have to. They don't come on their own initiative compared to my AP classes and my period 4 students. Next slide, please. And also for my period 5 students, for those students who would come to take the retake, oh, by the way, you'll notice that I have the 2 letters CC. So I don't call my quizzes quizzes, so they're called CC or comprehension check. Because usually when they hear the word quiz, some of them have test anxiety. So at least if it's comprehension check, I'm just telling them, I'm just checking your understanding, your comprehension. And and most of my former students would tell me at the end, it's so cool that we have our own jargon. Like we have CC for comprehension check, we have LABET for labs. I kind of come up with my own just so they will feel special that they are in a science class. But anyway, so half of those students who come to retakes who do not, so 50% of students who fail a given CC, they sign up, they come on their own initiative to take retakes. But a fourth of those students who come to my retake do not do any preparation at all if it's period 5. Next slide, please. But for my AP classes, it's not a problem. No? So when they come, they have already prepared. So they do. I don't call it test correction. So they annotate their CC paper, or they have come that Tuesday, the Tuesday before, to ask for help, or they come during lunch. I know that we're supposed to close our rooms during lunch and after school, but some students are not able to come during flex time. And so I just open my room during lunch and they come for help. And so most of my AP and period 4 students, they're ready to take the retakes. But for my period 5, I really have to go out of my way to help them prepare for the retakes. Next slide, please. But whether you're a period 5 student or you're my AP or period 4 student, you will most likely get meeting expectation feedback after the retake, because I don't let them take the retake if they don't prepare for the retake. So next slide, please. So what are my takeaways? First, it's very important to really explain the why of retake if you want to establish growth mindset. And this also helps explain the role of homework, because homework, I still count homework, and that's one thing that I wanna work on next year. But now it's just 5% of my grade. It also helps explain why I'm not grading homework for completion. Okay, because the homework prepares them for the CC and the retake. And so I had to explain the value of retake, why, and it's not just to the students. I explained this during back to school night also, so both parents and students understand why I'm doing retake. So it's not just to earn points, but really to help them see that they can learn from their mistakes. And it's all right that you don't get so frustrated when you didn't do well the first time, because there's always an opportunity to do better. Next slide, please. And then it's very important to put structures in place. I keep on reminding myself that I'm dealing with adolescents, and adolescents, even though they might deny it, they require structure. So I would dedicate, sometimes I would reteach the whole lesson, especially if a good number of the students did not do well. Or I would set aside class time to highlight good explanations and common mistakes. So that's also one way to build community, because when I identify explanations from students who normally would not speak up, then I know that they feel good afterwards, that their answers were shared in class. At the same time, I would have one-on-one with students. I use flex time. I require them to complete their missing homework, and I explain why the homework is important. So you didn't do well in this quiz because you did not have enough time to practice. Why didn't you have enough time to practice? Because you didn't do homework A, B, C, D. So they have to do the homework again before they take the retake. Okay? And I always ask them to bring their original paper when they do their retake, so that they can compare. I want them to see the growth. When I return the second paper, I want them to see that there has been improvement, and not just a number like from 15 it went up to 20. So I want them to see where they improved. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this is one thing that I found very helpful, and my coach reiterated this to me. So retakes do not have to be the entire original assessment. So it could just be a portion of the assessment. Like today, for instance, I am so today was such a long day. Well, it still is a long day today. And so one of the students who was doing retake, I gave her a paper, and then she said, Miss G, isn't it that I will just retake this last part because I already know how to balance equations. I already know how to do mole stoichiometry. I'm just struggling with the conceptual explanation. And so then I realized, oh yeah, I forgot. So I just had her do that part where she was struggling. So, and also, especially for my IEP and 504 kids, this chunking, because they can focus on just a specific skill that they missed in that CC, it helps them focus. It really helps them prepare for the retake, and it makes it less overwhelming. Okay, next slide, please. And then with retake, as part of my grading practices now, I also had to reformat how I am designing my CC. So in the past, if I have MCQ or multiple choice, the standards will be mixed everywhere. Now, because I want to focus on specific skills, so I arrange my questions by standards now. Like numbers 1 to 3 will test standard A, numbers 4, 5, 6, da, 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 da. So if I see that the mistakes are on 1, 2, 3, then the retake will only be on that particular standard or that particular performance expectation. Next slide, please. And I also started to practice double dipping. So if you have a chance to read the book, this is in chapter 11. So what does this mean? So my CC always includes skills from a previous lesson. And so if a student doesn't do well in lesson A, and I know that in the next quiz, in the next CC, I will also have questions touching on quiz A. Then the student, that second quiz can just be the retake for the previous CC. Okay. Okay, I'm almost done. So takeaways. So no matter how organized you are, we really have to have a personal relationship with the student when we are introducing a new practice. And so that cura personalis or personal care for the student is really important. Next slide, please. So my next step would be, I really have to look into whether, how do I make retakes mandatory within the context of our school? And then how do I redesign my grade book so that it will reflect the real story of my students' progress in class. And I have to explore more of these double dipping assessments. And I think that's the end of my slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Thanks for presenting. We have a couple more presenters, and I'm going to do like a quick time check. So we only have about 10 minutes or so. So, but if I believe we're going to go over a little bit, and you're more than welcome to leave if you have to go. But if you will stay, I would love that. And then of course you'll be compensated for that. All right. So next up is Lekar.
Hello, everyone. I hope you could hear me better. Good afternoon. So I am Lekar Maghanoy, science teacher at Thornton High School. So I have done, I did a lot of focus on these practices because these are my focus on my action research plan. My focus practices were redos, retakes, no grade penalty for late work, reducing weight of formative assessments, increasing weight of summative assessments, and then the no zeros. Next slide, please. So I am I'm already teaching science for 13 years now, and it's my 3rd year of teaching at Thornton High School. And then the demographics of our school, it's a little school, but we are like a team, a family in our school. Number of enrollments for this school year is 62, number of teachers 8, and number of staff 10. No. And I was able to learn about equity-based grading when my principal, Dr. Denny Marenko, handed me a book in grading for equity. And I read the book and was interested about it. Next slide, please. And I was interested in grading for equity because I was doing some of the practice the whole time I was teaching. Because for these 13 years, I already do retakes to my students and I did not penalize late work. So I realized that my practices were equitable and could help a lot of students. And also grading for equity avoids bias, promotes accuracy and motivation to learning, which is very essential to our students, especially to our school, Thornton High School. Baby. So in our school, there were 5 teachers, including me, that were interested in the implementation of equitable grading. And these are the practices that we're focusing on: redo, retakes, no penalty for late work, reducing formative assessments, increasing summative assessments, and did not include zeros in grading. I would like everyone to know that we did not implement right away all of them. We take one step at a time. We meet every Wednesday with these 5 teachers, and we make sure that we have to do each practice one at a time. Next, please. So how did we implemented all of these practices? So with the support of our principal, we meet as a one group every Wednesday, collaboration, and decided as a team to implement one practice at a time to see which works and won't work. So there were, every Wednesday, there were like SEL team and then the equity-based grading team. So we were able to plan accurately on how to do and what to include and not to include. It took us some time what practice to include, and then we were able to see the difference between each practices and somehow have some pros and cons in between, because we have different subject matter and we differ standards across each curriculum. Like math is different from social science. We have different standard from English. So that took us a while for us to what really practice needs to be focused on. And then We included the grading for equity information just to make sure everybody is informed, including parents and students at the beginning of the spring semester. And in our case, for Thorn High School Quarter 3, and we put that one in our syllabus so that everyone in the community, not just the teachers, but as well as the students and the parents, are informed that we are implementing equitable grading practices. Next slide, please. So these are the things that we have included: no penalty for late work, giving retakes and redos, including not including attendance and grading. We are not tying attendance and grading anymore, which we were doing for the past years, but this time we are not. No zeros in grading them on the recent performance, increasing the weight for summative assessment to 75%, and then reducing the weight for formative assessment to 25%. I'm sorry, baby. Silence. All right. So these are the results from my other teachers. I did a survey. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you like using grading for equity for the spring semester? So mostly all of us said it was good. 1 being the least and 5 being the most. As you can see from the survey, there's one teacher said he's in the middle, and 4 teachers, including me, said almost going 4 or 5, going to the most. So that means it was good. So what grading for equity what we have implemented so far? All of the practices were implemented, except there's one teacher was not able to implement the no zero policy yet. Maybe he could not really accept that one for now, and then grading them on their recent performance. So he was not implementing that. Out of 5, 4 teachers were implementing everything. Next slide, please. So rate your experience in using grading for equity in your class. So most of us were able to say that grading for equity is really good in our class, and we have this 3 and 4 as a result. And these are the feedback from our teachers. They said that more trainings on how to implement it, most especially to the kind of learners that we have in our school. Better justification for the no zero policy for me. It still does not make sense with me logically. So I think this is a teacher that was not implementing the no zero policy. Personally, it all worked for me, minus the disconnect I felt with students who were disengaged or absent during instructional time, because there were students that were able to pass as long as they were successful on their recent performance and was able to pass the final test, because we were able to increase the weight of summative tests. So to those who were not attending classes this whole time, when they were able to attend the last couple of weeks of the quarter, was able to pass because of this one. So one teacher somehow felt a disconnection with that. And although with those feedback, still all of us said keep doing equitable grading. And students focus primarily on the big ticket assignments. These are the summative assessments, the final test, the unit tests. And also another feedback, redos and not giving penalties to student work help them a lot in terms of giving them support and encouragement. And another con somehow is that it's very difficult to fully implement ECL with GFE. And hopefully when we do another training for grading for equity, we might including or connect grading for equity with the social emotional learning. Next slide, please. And also I did a survey for the entire school for all students, which we received 17 responses all in all. And we asked our students, do you like the no penalty for late work? Most of them, majority of them said yes. I guess a little from no, and then other 17% for maybe. Do you like the retakes or redos given to you by your teacher? And the result was so surprising. 94.1% from our students said yes. And no one said no. If you could take a look on that pie graph right there. And only one said maybe. Rate how much you like the idea of not tying attendance in grading. 1 very means unlikely, and 5 very likely. Most of the students were liking the idea of not tying attendance in grading. So do you like the no zeros for your work? 87.5% or majority said yes. I got a couple of students said no. I think there are 2 of them, because I suspect that these students were those who are submitting work on time, very diligent and very punctual. And how do you like grading with your recent performance? Like, especially when they were not doing well on the first part of the quarter, but are doing well, you know, there are late bloomers and they're doing well at the later part of the quarter. So most of them said they are liking the grading for recent performance. No one said 0 or 1, which means unlikely. Next slide, please. And a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is equals to least, 5 is equals to most. How do you like using grading for equity for this spring semester? So our students already knew about grading for equity since the start of the quarter, because again, we make sure to uniformly all of the teachers who are doing it, we together put that on our syllabus. So many of the students were liking our grading for equity this spring semester. And we ask is, how was your experience using the grading for equity in your class? 1 means awful and 5 means amazing. So usually most of our students are in between, going up, meaning they said it's amazing, and no one said it's awful, which is very good. And how do you like changing the weights of summative and formative assessments? So this part, somehow many said reducing the formative assessment. Many said yes, but majority said maybe, because most of our students, especially at Thornan, they really prefer that their daily work, their assignments or classworks will be graded. But we are getting in there. We are trying to let them understand that if they are just getting a high piece of their summative assessment, then they will be more successful than just doing those practices or homeworks. But hopefully, slowly, one at a time, they're accepting the idea. So what are the students' feedback on grading for equity? So why is equitable grading important for you? And these are all students' feedback. So it is, according to them, it's important because I can work with what will help me. And it's because our grades depend on how fast we can graduate. The third student said gives everyone a chance to graduate on time and helps to know where I'm at. And it's my grades and I need to pass. And one of the students said, it will get me out here sooner and realize what life is like. And a student said, because it's fair. So that means our students understand that we are implementing equity in our school. It helped me get my grades up. So those are student feedback. Next slide, please. So what are our takeaways? We find out together with my colleagues more authentic results. Grading is very accurate, and grades of students is a reflected representation of what they have acquired and learned, not just on what they are behaving or their somehow their soft skills, but what they are learning. And most of the results, their scores are higher. And also we're giving students their flexibility. Next slide, please. And at the end, this is my reflection, all in all. Assessing from the successes in each class and in my class, it is best to continue with grading for equity for the next school year and hopefully more trainings, especially for my other co-teachers. Gonna work with assessments, both summative and formative, because somehow students are like still have to understand more about formative and summative. So we have to work on that. And checking for understanding every week through quizzes and exit tickets. And standardize the grading procedure by putting it to the syllabus at the beginning of each quarter. And grading for equity was a success because of the support given by the admin and staff, by the teachers. I found out that not all teachers who are in our cohort was able to get the type of support which I got from my school, which is I'm very thankful to. And teachers at Thornton are very open to possibilities and opportunities, and students were very adaptive to grading changes because majority of the teachers were doing it. So we are just very consistent. We are very uniform. So students, somehow they have questions, but when they see that all of us were doing it, then they just trust us. So before I will end my presentation, I would like to give a big shout out to my principal, to my colleagues, Sir Dan, Miss May, Fernanda, Sir Alan, for the very big help when I said to you, can we do and implement grading for equity? You never said no to me. And thank you very much. And this makes our grading for equity very successful. And thank you everyone for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Lakar. It's very informative. Now we have Mr. Murphy.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be mindful of your time and I'm going to go fast. So I'm Kevin Murphy. I teach U.S. history and APUSH at Westmore, and I'm going to talk about minimum grading, accepting late work without penalty. So next slide, please. So again, I've been teaching 18 years since 2003, 2004. I've taught U.S. history that whole time. This is my first year with APUSH. I think most of you know the demographics. We're at about 1,400 students. We have 18% SLE, 34% socioeconomically disadvantaged, and 6% students with disabilities, so IEPs and so forth. So why did I get into grading for equity? That's kind of the work I've been pushing at our school for a long time, but also when we went into lockdown, I just really had to be self-critical about how I really build relationships with students and so forth. Then during distance learning, we heard about grading for equity. I don't know what snafu happened, but I let my interest be known, and then they were forming a book club. And then for some reason, I was, our principal at the time told me I wasn't in that book club for some reason. It was really weird. But that's okay. I got a copy of the book anyway, and I read it on my own over the summer, and it all just made sense to me, especially when building community and building relationships. Could you, next slide, please? So I already sort of implemented this during distance learning, particularly the late work without penalty piece, just because the kids, you all know this, that the kids just had so many things going on, and then we were asking them to actually sit in front of a screen for 5-6 hours a day. So I was already familiar with doing late work without penalty and so forth, but I applied that also with the minimal grading, the minimum grade being 50% as opposed to a 0. I implemented that across all my classes. I had 4 sections of U.S. history and 1 APUSH, and then staffing issues had me do 2 APUSH in the middle of the fall semester, so that was fun. But to implement, I'm going to just reiterate what everyone else is saying. It's all about communicating and being transparent with your students and parents. So the syllabus, and I'll show you what it looks like in the syllabus here in a second, but that means putting in those policies in the syllabus and making it crystal clear what you're doing. Like, I accept no work without penalty. Kids don't hear you say that, so you have to keep saying it and saying it and saying it. I repeated it to my parents at back to school night, and then just continual communication throughout the year. particularly, like I said, because the kids, they may not hear it the first time. We all do that. We all think we're listening and then maybe we're not. But I'm also giving them the rationale behind it, behind the minimum grade, behind the late work. So all the things we're learning from the PD, I'm being transparent about it, like, why do you have a 60% chance of failing the class with a 100-point scale? And so that's why we do 50%. Next slide, I'll show you the syllabus here. So if you'll see there under homework, you see the second bullet point says late work will be accepted without penalty. So get in contact with me if you're falling behind. And then at the bottom here, I wanted to make sure they understood what I meant by accurate, bias resistant, motivational. When I do my syllabus next year, I may provide more information about that. And I also wanted to point out, like, the main thing I think students got was this idea that your grade is going to be about what you learned and what skills you developed, as opposed to just how many points you accrued. So as you can see in that second to last line, it says, as opposed to blind pursuit of points. I was being really intentional about that. It's like, I'm moving away from that. I told them, and also with that too, I told them, like, there's not going to be as much, I'm not going to be grading homework that much. I'm just going to be grading assessments. So that work you need to do is for practice. And so I started trying to change my vocabulary around homework to practice. Next slide, please. This is some really basic data. One of the big things I got out of this was accepting late work without penalty will reduce the number of D's and F's. And for me, what I found out is if there are fewer D's and F's, there are more students that are present, mentally, physically, and emotionally. So you can see I took fall 2019 data, considering that was basically the same conditions we're in now, except masks and distancing and all the other stuff. But you can see I didn't have many F's in the first place, but a lot of D's. And you can see how that's broken down. But when last fall, when I was doing these policies, you can see about the same number of D's, but all those F's went away. I didn't give one F last semester. And so you'll see that, and because there are more students this fall as opposed to 2 years ago, you can see actually the percentage of D's went down as well. So what's happening is those F's are becoming D's, and those D's are becoming C's, and those C's are becoming B's. And I think really why I'm doing this too is for that relationship building in that community. Next slide, please. And you'll see where it comes. I did not edit these responses. I gave a survey this week. I was giving surveys throughout the year just to kind of see, but this is the freshest qualitative data that I have here. So you can see words like stress, right? Kept me not stressed. My grade would not go down completely if I didn't get a 0, because when knowing you get a 0, you kind of just let your mind slip and don't even try anymore because you don't know if your grade's going to pass, so why even learn? So that's kind of the thing, right? It's this idea, like, I got a couple zeros, my grade's screwed, so now I'm just kind of showing up. The no zero policy was definitely a game changer for me. It made me able to focus on what I was learning without worrying about my grade being in trouble every day. I'm going to focus that word every day. Of course, they're going to have stress about their grade, but now when you're in class, you're present. This helped me a lot because I always do the work, but sometimes late. And with this table, I was able to do my work based on what I know, not copying someone. I think that's one of the things I really hated about grading homework, is that there's just so many kids just copying. In your class, you see them copying for other classes. And I just noticed people were not copying, not just in my class, but in other classes too, because they were present for my class. Next slide, please. What effects does minimum grade policy have on your engagement? More interested than obligated to learn. It helped in lessening the idea I'm doing these assignments for the grade. Made a lot more sense of the big old 0. I understood why a majority of the 100% scale was failing. And so that's just kind of the argument, like, kids not getting why the grading policy is the way it is. And it allowed me to prioritize quality and overall preserve my mental health at times when it was waning, as I knew I would have a safety net to fall back on until I could finish the assignment. Next slide, please. Thank you. And now this is another question, but specifically about late work. It helped me be way less stressed about having to turn in a few assignments. It also still motivated me to still turn in assignments despite them being late because I knew that I was still able to get full credit as long as I turned it in. It also increased my engagement in learning in class because I could be in class and fully focus on the lesson instead of having to worry about stuff like, oh, I have to complete this assignment or my grade will go down. Overall, it helped me focus more on learning so I can actually learn instead of focusing too much on grades. Late work was great when I was definitely behind or going through something, but also the leniency made me become lax. I definitely wouldn't want there to be a change in the policy, but it seems to be more of a me issue on the procrastination part, which I think is a great insight from this student, because when we're talking about motivation, it's about intrinsic motivation, not extrinsic. And so they're reflecting like, whoa, well, why is my grade down? Well, it's down because I'm not doing well on assessments as opposed to the late work. I like the late work policy. However, I also think because of it, I wasn't able to stay as engaged in the class as much as I'd hoped. I take it upon myself. So they're being reflective. I love it. This one's kind of silly, but a point taken. I have OCD, so the late work policy substantially helped me catch up and not throw me face first into the spiral of self-destruction. And I hear that. I think a lot of kids, when they get a 0 here and there, all of a sudden it just kind of spirals and so on. Next slide, please. Same question. I didn't feel pressured to work every single day because work takes a hold on my mental health, especially considering the absences that me and my peers have taken this year due to sickness and COVID. We've had a couple waves, just like all of y'all have waves at your sites. And so, yeah, so when things happen, the late policy is really helpful. Allowed me to think more about the topic assignment as well as staying more engaged on the specific topic. It helped a lot for me because other classes would throw tons of assignments at me at once. Having the late work policy was very helpful. So like, and we all know that we oftentimes don't think about our siblings and their classrooms and the amount of work they're doing. And so the kids can now prioritize, and it's nice. It had a positive effect that it didn't have me stress as much about the due dates, as well as allowing me more time to consume information and put more thought into the assignment. So again, that intrinsic motivation, doing it right, it's like that's one of the things I would tell them. It's more important to do it right than to turn it in on time and things like that. One more slide, please, I think. Cool. So when I'm reflecting on this, I think the most important thing for me is not only am I have kids present in class, they're showing up to class at the end of the year. Usually at this point, last week before the finals, I do a project, and the kids that are going to fail, they just stop showing up to school. So they're still in school. They still know they have an opportunity. The key word here is hope for those kids that are struggling or have specific needs and things like that. It's building community. I've never had better relationships with my students than I have this year. I'm just straight up. I have a story from yesterday. A student came up to me yesterday. Is Mr. Murphy, people are talking about your grading policy. I'm like, oh, what are you talking about? Yeah, I was in X teacher's class and all these students are back in the back of the room, and all they're talking about is like, oh, thank God Mr. Murphy has this, no late policy. Like, I'm not stressing about his class, everyone else should be doing this. Like, so kids are talking about this in your sites, and a lot of them are really appreciative of just showing that, it's not just all work and gathering points. It's showing that we as the adults in the room care about them. What I want to do next year is I also, during this too, like I said, I was limiting the number of assignments. I was lessening the impact of homework. So like I was telling them, like it's going to be assessments. And I got some pushback from my AP kids, especially this semester, because there's not as many assessments this semester than last semester. And they're like, we can't just be, and usually the AP kids are the ones that just crank work out, right? And they know how to do the points, they know how to play the school game and all that. And so when they didn't do great on an assessment, they're like, that's not fair. And I'm like, well, then take the retake. You can take as many times as you want. But my process was really, to be transparent, horrible. Like I just really need to spend the time to do a retake process, maybe talk to the other people in this cohort to help me out with that process. Ms. Polo's process is actually really good too. Big ups to her. It just, I think she and I will probably have some conversations this summer about that. And then what I'd like to do with my department is the department has developed a 4-point, like kind of start with a universal rubric. This is what a 4 would look like for writing a paragraph, for example. And then maybe building it out in our department that way is just kind of like, this is how we're all going to grade. Or maybe some other thing, or maybe just ask everyone in my department not to give zeros. I don't know. I'm gonna have that conversation with my department when we come back. Yeah, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you all staying late, being mindful of the time. We're 20 minutes over time, and I know you all have questions, so I'll be quiet now. Thank you.